which may be over a relatively short period of time, it may be several years that these individuals will need help and support in order to get them to a point where they are comfortable and happy living in their own home and part of society again. It is indeed a false economy not to invest now, not to invest at the very least the levels we're investing in at the moment and increasing that at least by the level of inflation. We have to at the very least be doing that. If we're not, then all we are going to do is create a much bigger problem further down the road that will take much larger funds to try and solve, and potentially we might not be able to solve it. We have to act now, today, not be thinking in terms of, well, we need to do this. We must be thinking in terms, we are doing this. And sadly, that is what is lacking. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And then last but not least, Charles Lucas from the Conservative Party, I suppose representative of the government.
Thank you for that. And as always, being last in a line like this makes it, I could sit here and repeat everything that we've heard already. I think the really interesting point to come out of what we've all just heard is that all of us sitting before you are on pretty much the same side with the same agenda. We all are aware that the homelessness issue in Bristol is a chronic issue and we have to address it. There are loads of different ways of coming up with ideas of how to address it, and it's very easy to blame other organisations, past administrations, central government for the problems we are facing. But we are all here trying to address the problem. Nobody is trying to avoid the issue. Obviously, as we've heard, there is the sort of public face of homelessness, which is the rough sleeping issue, which to all of us,
no clue, mate.
To all of us, is a disgrace that in a city like Bristol in 2016 we have the numbers sleeping rough that we do. The housing crisis, we all know that there is a huge housing crisis. We need to build houses. We've heard about the plans to build houses. We're not building them fast enough. We need to build more houses. We need to build more starter houses. We need to build more affordable houses for everybody.
There's thousands of empty buildings across this city which are perfectly habitable.
Hang on a minute.
It's really important we hear you. Really important I hear from you. But just on this one point,
these are lies. These are lies. These propaganda and lies.
Can we come back to you? Just let Charles finish, and we'll come back to you for sure.
Okay. We need to address the issues of hostels. We need to address the issue of building new houses and releasing new homes. We've just heard how the need for hostels has been, there's been an attempt at addressing it. But there is so much more that we all can do, but there isn't a bottomless pit of money. Okay, we all know that. The way to do it is you've just made the point about freeing up existing empty buildings. I couldn't agree more. But there's also a point, if we can build houses throughout the housing need, right up through the scale, we can release more houses, smaller houses, to accommodate people who need houses to get them off the streets and to get them out of hostels. So we're all saying the same thing, and we all would like to try and come up with the magic solution. There is no magic solution, apart from hard work and investment. And I would also agree with the point we've heard about working with other volunteer agencies and addressing the root causes of all the problem, whether it be health, mental health, and other social issues, all of which need to be addressed.
Thank you, Charles. Did you want to have make a point? Yes.
Hi, I'm a homeless person.
Yeah.
I've been in Bristol, been homeless 13 years, 3 years on the system here, and I'm in a hostel. What interests me is, okay, I was only made homeless because of a local authority made a mistake and I was put on the streets. Okay, nothing to do with relationship, not paying rent, etc., etc. Yes, that's the tip of the iceberg. My concern is the whole 3 years I've been homeless in Bristol, not one person has come to me and said, Barbara, what is one little thing we could do to make your life easier? You know, we are treated as if we're all thick, to be honest, you know, and we had before Christmas, we had Gillian Douglas in the hostel, okay, with a load of people about getting us all back to work, etc., etc. And it struck me sitting there, actually I don't need re-ing, re-apostrophe-ing, I do not need rehabilitating, I do not need re-educating, I do not need reforming. The talkative gene's never going to get reformed with me. Okay, I am soon going to retire in 5 days' time, unless the government changes it all then, and next month I'm going to be 63 years old. Right, now, I've had a job as a teacher all my life, I worked in prison, people like Barry don't want me at all. But the stress of being in my hostel, right, with working ages, I nearly got knifed before Christmas, for my protection, that's not in the public domain. But I have the police protecting me. I've been exposed to most Class A drug dealers in Bristol.
What do you, I think you said it to start with there.
So I would like more
consultation
with people to say, what's one little thing we could do in the hostels to make life easier? Right? Okay? And I've got a few suggestions. Right? We need like a homeless people's forum. In fact, I'm going to set up a couple of websites for it. Okay? And sort out a conference. That we get together and give positive solutions. I spoke to George at the Sleep Up last year, and thinking about it and what I observed, okay, you came up with the idea we need more single person accommodation. I'm seeing people being finally go to the system, help with their issues, housed, and I'd love to have a place where I hear silence, quite honestly. But for most people, it's been put in solitary confinement, and within a few days, a few weeks, they're back out because they can't cope with being on the road. I had a young man in my room in the hostel who I helped with his citizenship exam from North Africa. He lived in the North African country in a group, come across to Tripoli in a group, come on the boat in a group, got to Calais, work in a group, last house, got asylum in a group, comes in a group, all of a sudden, here's your one-bedroom flat, solitary confinement. So why don't we have some more community houses for people? There are a lot of people. I'm in the hostel that doesn't have an ensuite, so I have to go down the corridor. I can meet anyone in my nightie in the middle of the night when I go to the loo, right? Why don't we have more hostels with more like university halls of residence where you have ensuite, so you can go in your room at night, you've probably got a microwave, you can cook something quick, but you've got downstairs a lounge, community room with people, whatever. So there's some little suggestions that all of us homeless people, like this young man, can put, and all the other homeless people I know, I've got a fantastic group of friends of homeless people, that we could get together and say, hey, but not only that, I was in one hostel, it cost £200 a week to keep me there. It cost me £135 a week to keep me in this one. I don't need that type of support. You know, there's a lot of out there, as some of you have said, who've come from, you know, bad landlord, whatever. We don't need that support. It's wasted on us. And the people who do need it, the people with the serious issues and mental, are not getting it because it's spread too thin. So we really need some kind of open discussion on, with us homeless, whatever party is in control, to say how we can help with the situation.
Right. It was Barbara?
Yeah, that's Barbara.
Thanks, Barbara. I think the issue you raise is one of need. And needs not being met. Now, I know that a lot of the organisations put questions here. One of the issues that constantly comes up is it always seems to be about money. But in Bristol, there's an issue, isn't there, with the private rented sector and access to that. The rents are simply staggering in an awful lot of places. Yeah. And you know, I could pick up any number of the organisations who put questions here, and it says make private rented housing more accessible. Strong demand for private rented accommodation makes it more difficult for things. Let's pick up on that point for a second and see how would you tackle what is clearly an issue in the city in terms of access to private rented accommodation. Mark.
Yeah, going up 2015 alone. I think I would. It's not to pick a thing here, Charles. I do think there is an important point to make. We may be talking about the same problem, but it doesn't necessarily think we're talking about the same thing. I've just come back with a good friend of mine who said a problem well defined is a problem half solved. Some people would say that some of the key drivers around homelessness are about personal industry. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get yourself educated, make better life decisions, and you'll build resilience. Others of us would suggest that actually social policy has a lot to do with it. And the decisions made and the non-decisions made by people in positions of governance actually go a long way to determining what our life chances are. So selling off lots of council houses in the 80s, not rebuilding, not replacing the stock, actually has something to do with this. Not funding mental health services properly over the years has something to do with this. So it's not all just about personal decision, and that will shape the approach we end up taking, because either we're going to focus on equipping people to make better decisions themselves, which has some, you know, some value, and or we are going to start saying what's our responsibility in terms of shaping the conditions around people. And that feeds in. We do have this whale in the room, which is that the free market, left unfettered, has not delivered housing. You know, home, and again, I need to check myself, because I've been stressing myself. It can't just be talking about housing, because as someone pointed out recently in one of our housing meetings, housing almost has become an investment now, hasn't it? Yeah? People are terrified of their pensions, so we cannibalise the housing market, and that compounds the problem. So we have this big system, we have this big machine in play that is just hurting us continually. I mean, what we've said to do in terms of intervening in the private rental sector, and in lieu of just building more houses and making sure that our housing associations get the deal done and find a city that's receptive to them getting the deal done, was about extending the landlord's registration scheme right across the city, and making sure that some of the criteria around that is about rentals, security of tenure, as well as we begin to put a mayor charter market for good quality landlords, supporting good quality landlords, protecting people, protecting private tenants. And we've also talked with organisations like Acorn as well, and just saying, what can we do to strengthen your arm as you begin to deal with landlords, so that the local government needs to do something, but actually there are so many community-based organisations out there who are taking action on this area right now, organising tenants' voice, so that when Acorn knock the door, they know that if they don't deal with Acorn, if they don't respond, high-quality housing, then actually we're going to come knocking, and we're going to come knocking with some heavy boots in terms of prosecutions. We visited a mother the other day whose son fell through the floorboards in her home, and it was Acorn that, you know, the house was just left in such a horrid state. And again, as has been mentioned, that creates costs elsewhere. It creates costs in poor education experience, in mental health services, in needs for school interventions. So I think being working much more collaboratively with our voluntary sector to point out where the needs are, being a much more confrontational local authority and enforcement when we're pointed in the right direction. But at the same time, we must never take our eye off this big overarching problem. As Martin Luther King pointed out some years ago, you strain gnats and swallow camels. We don't want to solve the isolated small problems while leaving the big machine that is producing this problem time after time in place. We really need a forceful voice on city leadership on that.
Okay, I'm going to move the question on to Kay. Okay. The theme here, and it crops up for all these questions, and you know, Bristols put it here with the growing gap between the local housing allowance and private rents is contributing to homelessness. The private rent is UK.
Yes, a massive problem. I lived in rented accommodation for several years recently in Bristol, and I was very fortunate to have a very good landlord who didn't exploit me. Barbara mentioned the issue of stress, and I think this largely comes back to treating homeless people with respect, I have to say, which is what I said. These are not necessarily people who are in the position they're in by any fault of their own. And dignity and respect are really important. About the rented accommodation, as I said before, I think we need a large number of smaller units. That's overall, isn't it? I absolutely agree we need a landlord registration scheme. Unfortunately, it's not possible in the private sector to regulate rents without national government legislation. Not one size fits all, and we will need individual solutions to fit individual people, and that's really important. And so consultation with the organisations like St Mungo's is really important. Facing a problem like this in Bristol is of such huge proportions that we do need national action to work with other local authorities who are in a similar position.
Thanks, Kate. George Ferguson, how do you incentivise the private landlords to help with this issue?
Well, we are. I think I'm doing everything. I think we're doing everything that's been mentioned. I introduced the landlord registration piece, and we've now recently agreed to extend it. And it's right that we're doing it incrementally. It would be a disaster if we hadn't tried it out in some of the more challenging areas first before extending it. So we shall extend it. I think it's a good scheme. We work very closely with Acorn. We work very closely with our our other partners of Shelter, St Mungo's and others right across the board. Yeah, Barbara, you and I have had chats a couple of times. I think what you say stresses to me is there is no silver bullet. Everybody has a different perception of the solution. And so that's why I've set up partnership in terms of housing delivery. I may be an architect, but I'm not the expert in all the social issues, and that's why I've got the best possible people, from the RSLs to the housing associations, as I still call them, to the charitable sector, to the police, to business, all thinking and working together about how we find these solutions with homeless people. And I'm really interested in your perception. I was with somebody, a homeless person today, who's absolutely thrilled that he's now got a single person accommodation. He doesn't, I think, perceive that to be isolation. He sees that as his liberty. You have a different perception, and therefore I think it's really good that we develop some social housing as well that enables people to communicate with each other. So we are working right across the board. I am not the expert. We bring in the experts. I just ask anybody here, what more would you do? And it's been referred to that we've got too many empty homes. Okay, we may have too many empty homes. We've exceeded by a large number our target of reusing 2,000 empty homes. We're well over 2,500 now, and so we are doing all these things. Others can say it. I'm delivering it.
Thank you, George Ferguson. Charles Lucas, how do you deal with the growing gap between the private rented accommodation, the spiralling cost there, and the local housing allowance?
It's, in my view, it's a straightforward case of supply and demand, and it goes back to the need for more housing at all levels in the housing sector. So whether we need hostels, we need starter homes, we need single person accommodation that we hear some people want, some people don't want. But we need to keep building, and we need to focus on building. The figures are staggering. We need 26,000 new houses at all levels, right the way through the housing sector. There is, I believe, the possibility that figure is going to go up by another 10,000, I think, under the spatial strategy.
26,000.
Yeah. So it's,
another 26,000 to 85. That's for the
85 is the whole.
Yeah.
But it's a staggering number of houses, and we need them. The only reason prices are going up is because there aren't enough of them. So landlords, whether they're good landlords or bad landlords, can get away with charging the market rate. It's a very simple exercise of supply and demand, in my view. So to answer the question directly, in order to confront the gap in rental, we need to increase the supply of housing right the way through the scale.
Thanks, Charles. Tony, how do you get the private landlords on side?
Well, I think you have to work. There are some, probably the majority of the landlords are largely decent individuals. Some of them they're trying to get a nest egg for their future. I think the problem is not with those landlords, it's with the landlords that Acorn are having to work to try and control. It's those landlords that believe it's perfectly acceptable to have mouldy walls and to threaten tenants into putting up with all sorts of unsavoury behaviours and just unacceptable living conditions. And I'm glad to see that the landlord licensing scheme is being extended. It's been extended to St George. I think it needs to go into South Bristol and potentially across all the city. But what we really need to see extended is the Acorn's Ethical Lettings Charter, which is actually even more powerful and actually seeks an aspiration, not just setting what is the minimum that has to be done. Can I also just quickly go back to Barbara's idea about setting up an homeless people's forum? I think this is something that it's an excellent idea, and I'll give you an example. It's not in the same area. I went recently to the Integrate Bristol conference, which was a fantastic conference. I learnt a lot from it. And one of the reasons why it was so good was it was largely created by the people who were most directly affected by that particular area. And also, what you said about the loneliness. American Met Centre hosts once a week Bristol refugee walks. You allow refugees to go along. They have the same problem. They're put out in single bed flats somewhere in the city, and they don't have an opportunity to meet with anybody, and that's their only opportunity.
Which candidates have actually been homeless?
Yeah,
just out of
I just
interest?
finished. Paul, let me finish.
Oh, yeah, of course. Just a quick question.
The other thing I was going to quickly say as well is that there's been a study published today. I don't know if anybody's seen the release by Crisis, who have looked at. They've launched a campaign today, which is Homes, Nothing Less Will Do. Really ask you to go and have a look at it, but one of the things they found out is that 80% of private landlords are saying they will not take people who don't have a fixed address. And 20% of them are saying that even if they do take somebody who's homeless, they'll put the rent up because they're worried about losing out on their fee. So one of the things we can start looking at is how do we provide a deposit scheme that will encourage landlords to take on people who are previously owners.
Thank you, Tony. And finally, I think we've just got all the way down the line, but this time it's Paul, UKIP's view on bringing in the private rented sector.
Well, without a doubt, the ever-spiralling rent in the private sector is actually having a massive impact on the number of homeless people. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. I think there is a good case for potentially introducing a percentage profit cap on privately rented property, but there is a need for privately rented property as well. If we introduce a cap like that, then it would need to be on a national basis, just so that it actually has a benefit nationally and helps. But it does enter back. There is no one answer, because we do need more social housing available for people who cannot afford private landlord rents. We do need to put some sort of capping in place so that private landlords do not have the wherewithal to charge whatever they want, as opposed to what might be considered fair. We also need to look at the quality of housing in the private sector as well. There are many, many houses, flats across the city that are in such dire condition that if Mr. Health and Safety walked in, they would almost certainly condemn the property, and it's a disgrace that those properties are being allowed to be used as rental accommodation for people. So there's a lot of issues that we need to be looking at there, a lot of different issues, each of which have a different impact, but collectively they can have a big, big help, I think, across the board. But there is a case for a capping, certainly, on private landlord renting.
Right. Thank you, all of you. Does anyone want to add anything to it? Yeah, it's just definitely.
Given that it wouldn't be acceptable in any other financial transaction, what would you both do to make sure that private landlords are more willing to accept housing benefit and local housing payments? Because even when they can afford to pay the rents, the landlords won't rent to them. The essence of the question is it's discrimination. It's discrimination. From which would be acceptable anywhere else.
Yeah, George Ferguson.
I'll say what we are doing. I spoke to probably 100 private landlords not long ago on this whole issue to encourage more private landlords to accept people on benefits. To a certain extent, we will supplement the benefits. We will help the private landlords in terms of the survey, the condition surveys, making sure that they get through the energy requirements, because we don't want people spending too much on their energy and all that stuff. So we have a system of helping landlords, guaranteeing the tenancies too for fixed periods, so that they are in a safer position than they would be taking people off the open market. So it is a real partnership. We have got some good partnerships with private landlords. I would like to build on that. And I was encouraged actually by the response. There was some negative response of, we don't want anybody on benefits, but generally...
Is that right? Is that right, that somebody should just be able to say, we don't want somebody who's on benefits? I mean, it is just straight discrimination.
We live in a capitalist society where you know, that I'm afraid is the situation. I think there is a good case for control of rents, personally. I do think rents have got out of control in Bristol and Brighton. They've gone up more than anywhere else outside the London aura. You know, if you're poor in a rich city, you're poorer than if you're poor in a northern city. You know, affordable housing in Bristol is 80% of market. Well, 80% of market in Liverpool is about half than it is in Bristol, so you're left with less to live on. So I do think there is a need for a balancing process, and it's a mighty difficult one under the current government. I don't know what Charles thinks about it.
I'll come to Charles. Marvin Rees, just on the issue of whether or not it's right that private landlords should be allowed to discriminate in this manner. Why should they be given that choice? Do you think it's right?
No, I don't think it's right. The fact that they can do it, and I would love to look at the levers that might be available to be able to take action on that. Would love to. Fundamentally, I don't think it's right, because again, I think there's a bit of reframing again that needs to take place around housing, just like we might want to think about transport and water. Actually, that actually some things are too important just to be left up to the uncontrolled free market. Right? We need to intervene. People need homes, people need water, people need access to good quality healthcare, they need access to good quality education. There are all sorts of aspects of our society that are so fundamental. They say that we have said as a country that we need to be able to intervene and make sure that they're available to them. And homes are one of those things. And I mean, even I've been, you know, someone just saying to me that he's been approached by business in Bristol as well by saying we want to attract in with investment, and then when the businesses come here they walk around the streets and they say, what kind of city is this? You know, we tell a fantastic story to the outside world. We're a fantastic storytelling city, and we have all people on Twitter, on Facebook, produce magazines. We have this whole, you know, hipster culture, massive attack, street art, wonderful outside story, and yet so many people in the city are being left behind by it. I mean, I would just take a little bit of an issue because we're, you know, I was talking to someone last night who's a chief exec of one of the serious housing charities in the city, and what he said actually, which is a bit of a challenge, George, is there's a fantastic story about pulling people together, but that's not what he's telling me. That's not happening. He's saying he wants someone who galvanises the city. It's not being galvanised. His words to me were that.
Who is it?
I'm not going to say. His words were to me that it's more of a knee-jerk reaction and a strategic approach to housing. And his words were, homelessness is more of a bullet point on the end of a home strategy than it is a core principle to what we want to do. Now, it's just important that we take that into account. You know, so we are talked about priorities. Kay talked about priorities earlier on, and it is about what do you want to do. And I think over the last few years we've celebrated Bristol, and that's really important. But unless we deal with people who are being left behind by the fantastic story of Bristol, it's a morally bankrupt celebration.
Just a show of hands, just a quick show of hands. I'm going to give you'll get your chance. Who thinks that Bristol prioritises homelessness? If you think they really are putting homelessness at the top of the agenda, put your hand up. Okay. Is it, to be fair to Bristol, is it something that is on the agenda? How about that? Yeah. Okay. So it's yeah. I'll give you very quickly a chance to respond to Marvin. I want the others to get in on the issue of whether it's right or wrong for private landlords to discriminate.
Well, all I know is that we've got the top housing associations working in this region, working in Bristol, working with me, chairing my Homes Commission, chairing my affordable delivery board, co-chairing it with me. Those are two different housing association CEOs. They are absolutely on side with what we're doing, so I just have to wonder who this person is that Marvin pulls out of the bag.
We'll let your
Cluedo.
You can do your research. Charles Lucas, though, on the issue of whether or not it's right that private landlords should even be allowed to discriminate against people who are looking for social housing. What do you think?
It's a free market, isn't it? I mean, people are in the private sector. Landlords should be able to rent to who they want to rent to, of course. Having said that, I agree. Personally, I think it is absolutely wrong that they can discriminate, because I would have thought a pound, I'm not sure everybody wants to rent in Bristol pounds, but you know, I think whoever is paying the rent on the property, I would have thought a landlord would be happy to take it. I think the bit that we're missing slightly is that it's the issues that we've heard about, the other issues that tenants bring with them, such as when there are other issues such as mental health issues, other social issues, social behaviour issues, all of which can, not always, but can come with certain tenants. And that, I think, is part of what landlords are trying to avoid. I'm not saying it's right, but I just think it's another element to the discussion. And I think without a whole load of very heavy legislation, I do not see how we can prevent that. I absolutely do not think it's right, but I think in a free market, I think it's very, very difficult to see how we can address it.
Paul Turner, discrimination, should it be allowed?
Well, I think one of the things that we should be asking is why. If private landlords do not want to take people who are on benefits, one of the questions we should be asking them is why don't they want to be taking people on benefits? Is it that there is a false stigma attached to people on benefits, and there's just a keep them at distance type situation? In which case, if we know why, then we can address that and alleviate the fears of private renters, and then that would open some doors. Not necessarily all of them. It would still leave us with a potential issue of escalating rentals as well. But I think that is what is missing. Is that the question is a good one, but I think it's the wrong question we're asking. We need to know why, and we need to address why, so that they then say, yes, okay, we will take them in.
So I work for Shelter, as a family support worker, and I've had our volunteers calling up letting agents, asking them whether it accepts housing benefit and why. So I've got that researching back from you.
Excellent, thank you.
You want to raise it?
Yeah, so just purely on this private sector thing, I think it's the wrong question. Marvin said earlier, we can't look at small solutions without looking at the big picture. The LHA in Bristol is wrong. You cannot buy a house and rent it at LHA levels and make it stack up. You can't do it. I've run 1625 independent people. We've been trying to do it with businesses. You cannot buy those houses at the LHA levels. The LHA level is wrong. In the last 3 months, there's been one property that you can rent at the LHA level on Rightmove, and that's a box room in Shirehampton. So it's not a question of why should landlords discriminate. They can't make it stack up on the LHA. The LHA system is wrong for Bristol. It's set on a wider area in Bristol. It's been stuck. Last time it got stuck, it gets stuck in April. It gets set in April. 3 months later, there isn't any accommodation for that level of money. Yeah. And now it's been capped at 1% a year for the next 4 years. There is no way that LHA, so the local housing allowance, will ever pay for any accommodation in Bristol unless the house prices crash. So it's not about new building. New building won't solve that because the numbers won't happen. It's because the government has set the local housing allowance at the wrong level and deals with Bristol unfairly.
You're right.
And the gap is wide and getting wider. Yes. It's not getting. It's not.
So one property at 4 months. So we're talking about will that one landlord with one room in Shirehampton discriminate against homeless people? That's not the right question. The question here is why is the LHA set like that? How can that be justified?
Yeah. Can I've got to be fair to our panel, and I know that Tony, just on the issue of private landlords being discriminating against those.
Yeah, well, it's wrong. It's disgraceful. If they're discriminating against landlords, and the crisis research does seem to show that it's discrimination based on their perceptions about people on social rent. I think I know one of the responses that was given by an estate agent in South Bristol was, no, we don't take people on benefits because we don't want blokes with pit bulls in our flats.
It's been stigmatized that everybody on benefits is exactly how it's portrayed on television. We sit there, we smoke crack pipes, we do read every couple of days, pit bulls all over.
Pit bulls are nice. Pit bulls are really nice animals as well.
That is
a
what
stigma.
we are
We're all
like
made to look
at
like we're on benefit streets, which is a channel, and that's the stuff. It's propaganda that's being put out there on a regular basis, basically portraying people in a particular way so that the government can feel better about attacking them and reducing their benefits.
Kate Barnard, and the word is stigmatised, isn't it?
Yes, landlords are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of things like ethnicity. You know, the signs about no Irish, no blacks have gone, and good too. That's absolutely right.
They've been replaced.
And now it's just no dogs.
No
just
dogs.
Well, I'd say
this issue about private rents in Bristol is wider than we think. I mean, it was only in the last couple of years that the University of Bristol was allowed to raise the cap on the number of students it took. And there are now 10,000 extra students at Bristol. I mean, that puts an enormous pressure on the private rented sector. And I would want to go and talk in very strong terms indeed to the university vice-chancellors, because they can build for the first-year students, but they're not accommodating those in their second, third or fourth years. And that has put an enormous pressure on the private rented sector in Bristol. And okay, it's great, they're brilliant universities, they bring a lot of jobs and excitement to the city, but they should be paying their fair share of the costs of the effect of their actions. And so that would be one of my priorities.
Just very quickly, thank you.
Yeah, just very quickly. Charles, this isn't a dig at you, but you can't just excuse anything by saying it's a free market. Even in a free market, you have to abide by the laws and the legislation of this country, which says that discrimination is illegal, and we just have to make sure that that's enforced.
Barbara, can I come to you in a second? This gentleman at the back.
Yeah, I've been on the streets for about 15 years, on and off, and I find that there is a great stigma against homeless people. But there's also a great stigma against homeless people who've got mental health issues or have been through the judicial system. I went to prison over 23 years ago for the offence of arson. I am not proud of that. Since I came out of prison, I became a security guard and SIA officer. I have found it difficult getting into properties because people use the stigma that I am an arsonist, when it is nothing to do with arson, but to do with insurance and money. When will I be free? You were meant to have rehabilitation. If after 23 years of not being in prison, that is not rehabilitation, then please tell me what is.
All right, thank you. Barbara?
I'd like to bring up the issue of universal credit.
Do stay here. It's probably a false alarm from the hospital above. I'll go check it out.
I do my teacher voice.
You can all just speak up. Right, okay. Alarm over. Can you make a point? We're going to try and stick to this.
The communal payday.
This all the private landlords and even social landlords who issued universal credit. The fact is that people on benefit are going to be paying their money to them and then they're going to pay the landlord. Now, I do know in the circle I mean, there's a lot of people who have money management issues, and I know in the hostels there's a lot of people who even find it hard to pay their service charges. One goes, how does that? I pay £8.50 a week, which covers my gas, electricity, internet use, water, sewage. I'm sorry, and a lot of people, young people, don't seem to realise that. It's looking for value for money. I've got a lot of free money, okay? And then of course they move into their accommodation, and also you've got to pay all of this, etc., etc. But I know there's a lot of people, especially those with substance abuse and stuff, that when they get their money, I've seen it in the hostels. They get their money every fortnight, go to the cash machine, and within half an hour later they've bought their substances, and then they're broke for the next 13 days.
Okay, can
I see how this affects private landlords. What do these candidates have about this universal credit? Because I just find it horrendous, and especially when I think it's just a programming of a computer, You know, I love to do direct debits and spend all of the money comes in, boom, boom, it's out, and what's left in the account is mine to go out to prime up with the charity shops. So how do these people think about this universal credit? It's coming from central government, but I'm seeing people with the whole system, and I've talked to one head of social housing who they're absolutely dreading it coming in.
Yeah.
You know, and is it any wonder that private landlords want someone who's got a job, you know, and not on benefits? So could I have a thing on that?
I'm not an expert. How much control do you have over universal credit?
None. And it's having real knock-on effects. And I know some of the housing associations are going to become more and more like private landlords and less like housing associations, because they are concerned about what it will do to their finances, because they are businesses, and if they're to support affordable housing and social housing, they've got to be able to make quite sure that they are receiving their rents. And so it's going to have a serious knock-on effect.
One of the, perhaps if the panel can respond to the universal credit issue, but I equally want to try and concentrate on the things of which you may have some control over. And I think we've covered private rent up until a point, but building of affordable homes is a theme that is raised by many of the organisations that have put questions to you. These are things that you can do. Kay Barnard, hypothetically you are mayor, you could build the affordable homes. What is the plan?
Well, thank you. It's not just a question of the council building affordable homes, it's the private developers as well. And that requires the council to insist that the right number of affordable houses, flats, whatever, are built in new developments. Because at the moment, Bristol doesn't do that. And there is a get-out clause at national level which says that if a development is not profitable, that the developer doesn't think that this development is profitable, then they are allowed not to put the affordable housing in. Well, I can't see that in Bristol, given that the prices have gone up so much in the last few years. I fail to believe, I really don't believe, that you cannot afford to put affordable units in those new developments. I would want to make sure that that is what happened. I've talked to the developers about it, but this is a real issue. In parts of the inner city, I know it's at 40% level, but we're not that far from Electricity House, where the penthouse flat there cost £600,000, and they were allowed not to put any affordable units in there at all. So that is something that really needs tightening up.
Paul Turner from UKIP, we need the homes, the demand is there. Will you build them?
Yes. I will slightly expand on that for you. There are a number of issues. The gentleman in front has raised it, the number of empty properties there are around the city that are just laying waste and nothing has happened to them. Not all of them are suitable for accommodation, but certainly many of them can be made suitable for some sort of accommodation. We could also work on freeing up brownfield sites across the city for development, leave greenfield sites alone. Existing council land we can use for building on, and there are many ways in which we can use recycled materials as building blocks to build very, very cost effective, very quick properties that people can start living in within a very short period of time. And we really need to be working on how we can get these properties up in the right places, the right type of properties, quickly. And bricks and mortar is not always the best way. And there are other ways we can build properties. We can manufacture them quickly, get them erect, and get people in somewhere.
We could do that tomorrow, Paul. We could do that tomorrow morning. We could start tomorrow.
Exactly. We could start today.
There's a few people.
Today.
I want to give everybody a chance to answer. There's a few people who want to make a point here.
I'm Carl. I started a social enterprise called Homeless Pay It Forward. I raise money and I directly house the homeless. It cost me £1,000 to get a homeless person into private rented accommodation. Just £1,000. After we get them into accommodation, we help them with counselling. Then we get them employment. My hardest thing is to get landlords on board with me. I've asked the council for their list, which for landlords who take housing benefit, I was politely told to go away. We've got a big problem here, but it's £1,000 per person. It's not a lot of money to rebuild someone's lives. 3 people I've helped, 3 people are in employment. I'm saving the taxpayer £8,000 a year. they're on £12,000 a year. They're paying their own rent now. Yeah, we're bringing the economy to £18,000 a year. If your bank told you today to put £1,000 in your bank account, then at the end of the year you're going to get £18,000 back. Everybody in this room will find £1,000.
Talk to me after.
Yeah. Why isn't this happening? Why are we spending so much money on band-aiding the problem when in £1,000 we can solve this problem? There's 2,447 homeless in Bristol. That's registered homeless. Yeah, there's 196 rough sleepers in the tents, under bridges and in doorways. The council spent money putting bollards in a doorway to stop the homeless
No, it wasn't
coming.
the council. It wasn't the council. And I was totally against that.
But they did Cytex up all the bridges underneath where the barges are,
Why
and that was the
spending
council that
a
did
small
that.
amount
Yeah,
of
that was
money
the council.
to help the homeless? £1,000 isn't a big amount of money to change somebody's life. And I can guarantee, you give that homeless person, I'm homeless myself, you give that person that carrot, they will run with it and they will build their lives, and that will change the economy of Bristol.
One second, I'm just coming from the lady in the black top.
Hi there, I'm Michelle from Brunel Care. I'm here as a social landlord today, and your focus seems to be on private landlords and new builds. But I'm here today with a stand over there with empty properties that we're not able to fill. And at the moment, you say you're working with housing associations. We're one of the biggest housing associations in Bristol that provides social housing for older people, and we are not seeing that support at all.
Really?
Not at all.
Well,
I have contacted
really
all of the
interesting.
homeless shelters in Bristol, and yet we're still not able to fill those properties, and yet everyone's sat here today saying there's a homeless
Well, it's
crisis.
madness.
Completely.
No,
And I think you need to
after,
focus on the resources
Yeah,
you've already
yeah.
got
Yeah.
without thinking about building new.
What are your occupancy levels?
I said that,
What are your occupancy levels from 1 year or 1 month to the next?
We have a turnover around 220 properties a year, so it's quite significant that we have. And the council, we've recently gone from having adverts in papers, which was available to a lot of people, to now online. And because of that, a lot of people are isolated to knowing how to bid for our properties and having those resources to bid. So we're having to come to different events and finding...
Are they
different
social
ways.
rents?
They are social
Yeah,
rents,
okay, I'm really interested.
Yeah.
So the
And we
property-
don't care
the
about people's backgrounds.
the space-
and where
the
they come from.
spaces-
I don't care if someone's an arsonist or has lived on the street for 20 years. I want to help someone have a house and have somewhere over their head, and we can't do it, and we're not getting that support.
Could you correct that to was an arsonist?
That
Yeah,
was an
yeah,
arsonist.
yeah.
Yeah,
Not is an arsonist.
The point is you have the space, but you have the trouble filling it.
we have the facilities, we can't fill it.
At any point in time, we've probably got about 15 empty properties.
Right.
Excuse me, can I just ask, do you demand rental in advance?
No.
No.
Can I, the lady here, yeah.
Yeah, I'm currently in a hospital at the moment, and I heard you was chatting about empty buildings, and basically I just wanted to raise a point that Redwood House is it used to be a hostel for homeless people, and basically they've shut that place down now, and they're not actually doing anything with it. And so I think that they should reopen it, just clean it up a little bit, reopen it for the people that is actually sleeping rough at the moment, because there is a load of rooms in there that are just not being used for people that are actually homeless. So.
Cool. I'm going to come to you in 1 second. Just bringing in some of these themes. I mean, I was asking you to answer questions about affordable housing. In a sense, what we're hearing is that they are, whether you build them or you take something like Redwood House, which is a building that is ready to do it. Charles Lucas, how do you manage this situation?
Well, the supply of more affordable...
Either building more affordable homes or turning those that are empty and using...
Well, at the risk of sounding like a sort of stuck record, in my role as a councillor, I sit on development control committees, and I know the mayor understandably distances himself from everything to do with planning and development control. No, legally I distance myself. Absolutely, understandably, as I said. I regularly sit at reviewing some substantial planning applications, and Electricity House was mentioned by somebody just now, and you look at the viability, and the officers make the case that we cannot reach the viability levels to justify the normal 30% affordable housing threshold.
Now, there are issues to do with all of this, but if you're going to have the threshold, they have to be achievable, and land values in Bristol now have reached a level. It's not housing values so much, although obviously they directly correlated to land values, but when land values have reached a stage, because geographically we are hemmed in by the sea, a river, and other boundaries, Bristol cannot expand outwards. It can only expand up or down. Okay, so we've got a situation where land values will only increase. That means that land values of buildings that developers come along and want to refurbish or demolish and rebuild, land values push up. This pushes the pressures up. So that traditionally, when you build a new residential property, it used to be roughly a third of the cost would be land, a third would be the construction, and a third would be overheads and profit. Now, which is roughly how the council came up with the 30% threshold. With land going up to now much closer to 50% of the finished product value, you've got a situation where the viability is not achievable. So the only planning applications in Bristol in the last couple of years that have achieved 30% social housing are when the land is being provided for a negligible sum by the city council.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Marvin, I'll give you a chance on this issue.
I mean, just to pick up, I like the line focus on the resources we currently have, actually, because there are, again, I think having worked in the voluntary sector in the city myself and then come in the public sector as well, and just seeing how much return we get from working with community-based organisations, people with the on-the-ground expertise as well. It's not just wishful thinking, it's actually proven that we get so much value, and particularly in our voluntary sector, what we also get is I think that sometimes we see services, and this comes in the recommissioning process, sometimes we see services, interventions in people's lives like Lego blocks. Anyone can deliver it, when that's not the case. Organisations that have been there for 10 years have built relationships, built credibility, built trust, and particularly for communities that are more vulnerable, go into trusted organisations with whom they have meaningful relationships rather than sterile services who treat you just like another person, is actually an important part of the service offer, and it's an important part of making the intervention successful rather than unsuccessful. My starting point in this whole journey around making homes, and I say homes, not just houses, homes, our number one priority in this coming election, was to go and talk to people who wanted to build them, people in Bristol who wanted to build them, and what I'm being told by people who had money ready to build in Bristol was a couple of things. One is, they said there wasn't the will in Bristol to get the deal done. So they take off, and actually I've heard that from a number of places. So the story told to me is, we come to Bristol, we try to get it done, there wasn't the will, we had an overly complicated local process where people were looking for 101 reasons why something shouldn't happen, rather than the things that shouldn't why it should happen. So in the end we took our money up the M5 to Birmingham, and they were waiting for us up there with open hands, open arms. So we built our houses up there, and that's jobs and homes. So there's a leadership piece of work to be done, which is around talking to those people who want to make it happen and find out why they think it's blocked. And I think too, again, it comes back to this question of it is about building the homes, but it's about putting all those support services around people so that they help to manage their homes. When you talk about managing money, I mean, we can anticipate that there are going to be some challenges. We know there are going to be some challenges, and our legal advice services and our community support services are absolutely critical. I go to a Church Hope Chapel over in Hot Wells. We have a lot of guys, mainly men actually, on a Sunday morning, come over every Sunday, who are coming out of the criminal justice system, they're coming out of substance misuse services, and they'll be homeless as well. And on the cusp of homeless. Again, Bristol gets a fantastic free intervention there. One of the services that they started up was just providing people with furniture. At that moment of crisis, when they do actually get a home and they walk in and it's empty, some of the guys were saying that's one of the moments of life crisis when they're very vulnerable to relapse, going back into mental health, substance misuse, or actually losing their home. Okay. And mobilising and using those resources is absolutely critical to the city's success on this issue.
Thanks, Marvin. Tony, I want you to get your chance on the issue of affordable housing, and I think broadening it a little bit, whether or not the management of the existing stock is working.
Yeah, well, it isn't. And I think, you know, I was told recently there are, at the moment, about 1,200 empty properties, 500 council-owned homes and 700 private-owned homes. Now, that was a figure I was given by an officer who then said to get back, but that figure changes all the time, and that may just be because of the particular instance. We do need to make the most of the assistant properties. I visited an organisation that some of you may have heard of called Abolish Empty Office Buildings. They're basically trying to work to bring empty office buildings back into residential use.
I've been saying this for years.
And one of the things that they've been looking at is they've been unable to get funding. They've done one development at the moment and they're in the middle of completing that, but we need to expand that. It needs to go much higher. Can I also quickly mention there was viability assessments mentioned quite a few times about as a reason for not delivering affordable housing. And those viability assessments are done in confidence. The general public doesn't get to see them. I think that if you come up with a viability assessment that says you can't deliver affordable housing at the level that has been approved by the council, then those viability assessments should be published, put in the public domain, and should be able to be challenged by people who know what they're doing.
Right. There's a few people who want to. I want to start with the gentleman at the back who wanted to. You had a point. I think.
Yeah, my name is Pat Cannon. I'm an army veteran. I subdivided with Combat Express TKSB, and I'm living, thankfully, in a library house. I'd like to ask Mr. George Ferguson, I'm not having a go. Last year, lads and ladies served the countries, but their lives that were lying to this country are living rough on the streets. Mr. George Ferguson, he wanted a city to become, used to have on radio, a city of sanctuary, and to adopt a Syrian. No disrespect to Syrian, but these lads and ladies put their lives on the line for this country. Why can't you put your own house in order first?
Well, shall I answer this one? But I don't want to miss out on answering the affordable housing thing, which is separate. I don't think it's either or. I think, you know, to be a good city, you've got to be a generous city, and that is about being generous to everybody in the city and making quite sure that we look after absolutely people like you.
You don't.
Yeah, no, but we do as much as any city, probably more than most.
Not enough.
So an awful lot of the criticism that we get is, I've shared this with all the leaders of all the core cities, Marvin's colleagues, who have got exactly the same problem. And so it's not a Bristol issue. This is a national issue, and we can't simply put up the barricades and say nobody else is allowed into this city.
No,
this city is enriched by the fact that it is a vibrant mix of cultures, and I will always defend that.
I'm not saying anything different to that. What I'm saying to you is, why can't you look after your own first? You're not looking after your own first. Lives, and put their lives on the line for this country, and have forgotten about
well,
it. That's the truth, Mr. Ferguson.
It is absolutely not the truth. We are doing everything we can within the limitations that I introduced right at the beginning of this. I absolutely see this as a priority. Now, as mayor, I have lots of priorities. You can't simply say there's one priority that is completely above all else. My biggest priority is to make us a healthy, fair city, and that means that we've got to put everybody into work who can work. And so, yeah, and that, you know, you've got to address the fundamentals of these problems as well as doing the sticking plaster as well.
Can you just?
But I want to do the affordable housing thing. Yeah.
On the issue of affordable housing, before you answer that, I just wonder, the existing system of the management of housing stock, I just wonder, does it work? Hands up, does it work? Does it fail? And who's sort of in the middle? I mean, you know, broadly, there's room for improvement, I guess. Yeah.
I think
these are people who are working.
Yeah, but I can give you the real figures that we have exceeded our target in terms of turning empty homes into livable and lived-in homes, and that is tremendous. I gave that priority because I know how long it takes to build a home.
Do you know the strip of houses behind the Holiday Inn, George? There's a strip of houses that's been empty for over 10 years there, owned by the council, perfectly habitable, and they're completely empty, derelict, just off Brunswick Square.
There are very few
completely
council-owned empty homes.
There's a whole road there.
Generally, the ones that are empty are in transition between occupancies.
Yeah.
But the affordable housing thing I want to get back to, because it is an absolutely fundamental. I, as Mayor, have no part in the planning process. We rely largely on the affordable homes that are meant to come out of the planning, out of what was called Section 106 agreements, which are the legal agreements that we have with developers. And they're meant to be at 30 and 40% depending where they are in the city. That we failed to produce them because of these financial tests that have been put on each site, and people plead that because, and I think outrageously, and I say this as an architect who worked for developers of all sorts, including housing associations, that I think it's outrageous that in those calculations is taken into account the price of the site. The price of the site should take into account the fact that people are required to produce 30 and 40% affordable homes. Then you would get a fair calculation, and then you would get the proper result. So I do think this goes back to national legislation about being able to plead that you can't afford it because you paid too much for the site, because that's basically what it is. But we are giving priority, and I've said an absolute condition of the sale of any publicly owned land over which we have influence, and that is our own and the Housing Community Association land, that we do insist on the proper proportion of affordable homes, and we do insist on working with people like United Communities and other RSLs that are able to produce those affordable homes.
I'm going to come to you. I promise you one second. You've been trying to get...
Just very quickly, I don't think firstly anybody's talking about putting up barriers for anybody. Secondly, we should be honouring the military covenant, which sadly in this country we are not. But what really gets my goat is to turn around and, as the mayor of the city, and say, we are doing as much as any other city, it's just not good enough. We should be leading the way in this country and showing the rest of the cities how it should be done. Just treading water and saying it's good enough to do what some other city does, it's just not good enough. It is just not good enough.
We are leading the way. We have the biggest
just said
challenge.
We're doing as much as anybody else.
We have the biggest
How can
challenge.
we be leading the way if we're doing as much as anybody else? We're not. You said it yourself.
We have the biggest challenge of any core city in terms of affordability, and I think everybody recognises that, and yet we are doing as much in terms of facing up to that challenge more than any of the other core cities. Now, you've got to face up to the fact it is a special challenge when you have expensive property.
Thanks, George. You've been very patient. Thank you very much.
My name is Billy. I work for 1625 Independent People, and the issue that I want to raise is, thank you. You say how you haven't got finance to help the derelict buildings, and you also say about transitioning, but how much human error is it going to take for you to realise that these places need help? St Morland House and Stokes Croft, 7 people died there last year, homeless people, because it's an unsafe building, and someone needs to give before obviously some more human error happens. So what, like, I know we talk about new builds quite a lot, but what is it going to take for you to sort of realise that these places need redoing or something before more people pass away?
Certainly from my own point of view, I think one of the things that's come out from today's meeting is there is a chasm between where the council thinks things are and reality. And I think that chasm is very big. And I think there's a lot of people in authority that just don't really know and understand the reality of what is happening. The fact that we've got properties that are standing empty, waiting for people to move into them, and we don't know about it, we're not using them from the authority, is a disgrace. The fact that people are dying in properties that potentially just need maybe some TLC a little bit more is a disgrace. I think there is a chasm, and we need to start bridging that chasm.
Well, can I just say, I'm not going to take that. There cannot be a chasm in a system where it's a partnership system. I have always said the City Council doesn't have all the solutions. It never has had, never will do.
They're corrupt, George.
It's a solution. We've got to share those. We've got to share those solutions with the deliverers. That's why we work with St Mungo's 1625.
It's a straw.
Yeah, I see a lot of nodding going on.
It is a straw poll, admittedly. It's not accurate. But you know, when we ask people to put their hands up, the evidence suggests that the system is could well be improved.
With due respect, but people see from their immediate point of view, and I understand that. But I have to look at the bigger picture and work with the whole city. I'm not just mayor of the city council. I regard myself as being mayor of the city. This is a job about producing a healthy city. To do that, you have to work with everybody, and I don't think anybody who works with us would deny that we do work very closely in partnership. On rough sleeping, we have a very strong partnership with St Mungo's and others, and I rely on that. I cannot deliver the solutions on my own. I can't deliver the solutions in a bureaucratic fashion. It's got to be right across the board, and we are delivering.
So I can understand why Mr Stokes is getting a lot of the attention, but I need to be fair to the other candidates. Charles, Lucas, do you want to answer this?
In what respect?
Well, the question that put Chief on, do you want to repeat?
It was morely about an issue is that we've got all these empty derelict buildings which just need a bit of TLC or knocking down, refurbishing, and it's a whole issue that you don't have finance or they're being transitioned, but people are actually dying in these properties
because the properties are unsafe.
They are unsafe, yeah, essentially. And
sure.
They could have
well, I mean, in terms of unsafe buildings, obviously, first of all, it's unacceptable. So we come back to, as discussed earlier, landlord registration and general all accommodation should be fit for human accommodation, shouldn't it? So, I mean, I'm sure we all absolutely agree that that's completely wrong. I don't know the building you're talking about, so I can't comment. I don't even know who owns it. Do you?
No, I just know it's St Morland's house.
Yeah, I don't know who owns it. But, you know, I mean, all of these issues, that's a common... I don't know whether that's an organisation. I assume it's not a council property. But, you know, it's a private landlord or an organisation that needs to be...
It's Westmoreland House. It's
Westmoreland.
Yeah. Westmoreland. It's here.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. I beg your pardon. It's private property.
Okay.
No social housing, minimal in there.
Yeah, I agree. We totally agree on.
Do we?
You and I.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The council does have a scheme whereby they will put homeless people into council property while it's empty. So I don't know if many of you know the primary school at the top of White Ladies Road that's really now in the middle of a traffic island, that had caretaker guardians in it for a time. So the council has the right to do that in its own property. I don't think it's got the right to do that in privately owned property, but it's certainly something that ought to be looked at. And this is really about the will to deliver, isn't it? This is really about how keen you are to make homelessness and homes in Bristol a priority. And absolutely, that is something I would want to do.
Do you want?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, would it not be a good idea that the properties that are privately owned by private landlords, if they've been empty and considered derelict for a certain amount of years, to be seized by the council and then refurbished and turned into properties that are useful?
Yes, that's absolutely true for houses. I'm not so sure about commercial property, which is what Westmoreland House was.
I think you'd be able to do the same thing with it.
Compulsory purchase.
It's compulsory purchase.
If it's empty for 3 years, you're currently now allowed.
Yeah, I think if it's been empty for more than 5 years, the council can compulsory purchase.
Yeah, of course they can.
Part of it is that the issue of safety and looking after people who are in these accommodations.
Well, Westmoreland House is one. And when I was a reporter at BBC, we actually made a documentary of Westmoreland House and we filmed it with the young woman whose father died in there. This was 2004, 2005, and I went up to London to meet the two guys that owned it. I don't know if they still own it actually, but a couple of brothers called the Coma brothers. And we went to visit them, and they developed this property in London where Boys Own were living and a load of Arsenal football players were living in this kind of palatial palace, and yet they were sitting on this thing in Bristol just waiting for the price to go up so they could make money out of it. People were dying, as you said, and they were looking at the profit motive. I mean, they were perfectly charming guys, drove us around in their Range Rover, and then one went off to get off in his helicopter. I mean, and it was just that kind of sense of someone outside of Bristol totally exploiting the Bristol market without any due regard for people in the city. I mean, again, the thing that we've been asked for by developers, by social landlords, is to be less risk averse as a local authority and use all the powers at our disposal to engage in compulsory purchase orders. And you know, there's a risk involved in that. My hope would be that there would be a risk for local authority in doing that, but my hope would be that actually if you begin to genuinely work as a city leader and you have brought the health service, the criminal justice system, if you've worked with business, with our universities as well, and you're collectively saying, do you know what, we're the organisation that has the power to pursue compulsory purchase orders, we're going to go for it, and you as our partners in the city, we want you to give us the cover, reputational cover if it doesn't go wrong, maybe even financial cover if it goes wrong. We want you to work, and we're going to take action on this on behalf of the city. Then you could begin to become much more assertive. And just like Kay said, it's about the political will. It's about saying we're going to unlock this city and we're going to make it.
Marvin, you haven't got a clue about compulsory purchase orders. There are so many legal loopholes to it. I was sued by the Coma brothers. I mean, they tried to sue me for being disparaging about their buildings in Bristol. They are very crafty operators who know how to get out of CPOs.
Well, George, I'd say
and your colleagues had many years where they could have done imposed a compulsory purchase order if that had been so easy, but it wasn't. We have come to a solution. It's not as satisfactory as it might be because it doesn't produce the proper amount of affordable housing because, as I've explained, the planning process fails to do that.
Well, George, I'm sure the charge about people not having a clue about what's going on in people's lives could be going on in many different directions.
Not having a clue about
I think what I'm talking to you about is having talked to people who want to get houses built in Bristol, who have a strong social conscience and know what needs to happen, are coming to me and telling me there's a lack of political will. It means the local government has not got itself.
Name them.
George, they'll come out in their time, but I'm just telling you, if you can deny that,
Paul Saville, sorry.
Not only me.
No, it's not Paul. But they're telling me there's a lack of political will and they want me to unlock it.
Name them. I'm not going to take these.
Come out on the streets, George. I'll show you them.
Yeah. This gentleman here. I'm just going to throw a curveball in.
Yeah.
The council did a aggressive eviction for the tents on all the parks. Now, I know that pitching up a tent on a park is illegal. I had a tent on the park in the back of Trinity Police Station. Luckily enough, because what I do, the council looked sympathetic on me and said I was going to be on last on the list of the eviction. Where do you expect these homeless people to go? If you're evicting them from the tents, where do you want them to go? They're not going to disappear. Bristol is one of 3 councils left in the country what gives a local connection. I haven't got a local connection. I was told I've got to be on the streets for 6 months to get my local connection. And I was told after it could take 2 to 3 years for me to be housed because I've got no addictions. You know, you're telling somebody on the lowest ebb who's just come off the streets, it's the first time on the streets for me, to be told that I'm going to spend 6 months on the streets to get a local connection. Then it could take another 3 years for me to get housed. So I go then, spend a little bit of money, buy a tent, find somewhere I can pitch it, it's nice and quiet. I made sure there was no addicts coming onto the park. Nobody made a noise after 10 o'clock at night. You know, we got respect from all the locals. They actually did a petition to keep us on the park.
Was there 2 or 3 tents there?
There was 2 or 3 tents. Yeah. I was the one in the middle. I'm now sofa surfing for the last 10 days, happy days. But where do you think they're going to go?
Tony,
you do all this illegal, aggressive eviction. Where are they going?
Barbara, I will come to you. I promise. Tony Dye.
Well, let's be frank about it. I mean, there is nowhere for them to go at the moment. And if there's nowhere for them to go,
there is, Tony.
And they found Paul,
buildings.
You get your chance later. He's already said, I'm going to answer the question of this guy. I'll answer your question later.
I'm supposed to be over here and I'm not invited.
Hang on, Paul.
That's for you to sort out with the organisers.
Oh, you should stand in solidarity for democracy, Tony. If you really believe in transparency and democracy, then you would boycott hustings that don't invite all of them.
Hang on for a second, Paul. I promise you're going to get your chance.
No, it's not the point. You're missing the point that I'm a candidate in the mayoral elections and I haven't been invited, as other independent candidates also haven't been invited. There is space for debate. I'm sorry, I'm really passionate about democracy. You know what I mean?
And that's
so. Right.
Fair point. I take it, Tony.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, Tony.
Right. As I was saying, I think the council does turn blind eye to quite a lot of little laws being broken. I think in this instance, if they found somewhere where they're actually, as you said, also doing a bit of a service in preventing some misuse of the parts, leave them alone until you found somewhere else that's more suitable for them. There are plenty of other things that the council should be spending its time on. Chucking people out of tents when they haven't got a roof over their heads is not a priority.
Charles Lucas, Conservative Party. We have people living in tents in Bristol. Where do they go?
There shouldn't be, there should be no enforcement. To answer your question directly, there should be no enforcement. You shouldn't be evicted from a park unless the council can provide you with somewhere to go.
Do you agree, George?
I do in principle, but what we do recognise is that people living in tents are rough sleepers like anybody else. That we have an outreach team that is in partnership with St Mungo's and the police, and it's really important that the outreach team have access to everybody. And I do know that tents have been